So in this demo, I'm going to talk about underglazing for decorative purposes. So we've used underglazes in different types of applications before. If we're creating decals or image transfers, or we're doing sgraffito, we'll apply underglaze and then carve through the underglaze. This is using underglaze for decorative purposes. One of the great things about underglaze is the color that you see when you open it is the color that you get when it's been fired and applied and everything. So this is chartreuse. It's like a really bright green, yellow green, almost neon color. So the colors that you see are the colors that you're going to get when they're fired with the clear to make them food safe to full temperature. They will appear a little bit darker, but for the most part what you see is what you get. So for decorative purposes, I came up with a design ahead of time. So on this cup, I've got some other colors of underglaze. I have that chartreuse color, and then I have a turquoise color that are brushed on in specific areas. Then what I did is I put tape over some of those in just little strips, and tape will act as a resist, kind of like a wax will as well. So wherever I brush underglaze on, it won't cover where the tape is, and then when it dries I can pull the tape off and that color underneath will be revealed. When you're brushing underglaze on for decorative purposes, I would recommend bisque firing it so that it's hard. It's that initial firing. This way, if you paint or brush it on and you don't like it, you can easily wash it off and it doesn't really affect the piece itself. Where if you were to apply it while the piece was still, if it was greenware, washing it off is a lot harder because you don't want to damage the piece and alter the piece in any way. So this has been bisque fired. I've applied some color here where I want that to stand out, and then I'm just going to put black over it for this. So I'm going to make sure my lid's on tight before I shake. And I'm going to shake it up so it's mixed up really well. It doesn't take very long unless it's been sitting a while. But this is I've used recently in the last few days, so it shouldn't take very long. Just make sure it's stirred up really good because it will settle sometimes. So that's mixed up really well. I'm going to take a larger brush since I'm doing a larger area of it. And I tend to use the stuff in the cap first. Just so that I'm not wasting underglaze. And when you first put it on, you'll notice that you can kind of see through it. There is a transparency to it. That is because it'll take multiple layers in order to fully cover the piece and have a good solid color on the piece. So all the parts where I applied color earlier, I put 2 to 3 coats on in all those places. So because I'm doing a darker color, it covers up the areas that weren't even taped. So you can't really see that color once this darker underglaze is applied. If I were to use a yellow over the top, those ones on the bottom, it would take a lot more underglaze to cover those because a yellow is pretty transparent. It's a really light color, whereas our darker colors over the top are really going to block a lot of that stuff that's underneath and not allow those colors to come through. So I'm going to apply it nice even brush strokes across the whole thing. So I basically have put on that point where I started, I've basically already put 2 coats on because you saw me, I went back to that starting point and applied some more. And in here you can kind of see through. It's shiny right now so it's hard to show, but over here you can kind of see there's a little bit of transparency to it, whereas back here the black is pretty solid where I've applied it. On bisqueware, your underglaze is going to dry pretty quickly on the first coat. Your second coat is going to dry fairly quickly, but not as quickly as the first one. And then your third coat, if you're doing it all the same day, is going to dry really slow. Because what's happening is bisqueware is still porous. So the clay is absorbing all that moisture from your underglaze, or a lot of the moisture from your underglaze. Some of it is air drying, but for the most part it's the clay that's absorbing that moisture. It won't affect it really too much, especially when it comes to firing, because it's not enough moisture that it's going to rehydrate the clay or break it down in any way, because we've already taken a lot of that moisture out through the firing process. I'm just going to make sure it's well coated, all the little nooks and crannies. And I did apply a wax resist to the bottom, so this will be easy to wipe off, just kind of at the wax resist with a sponge, so that I don't have a whole lot of underglaze on there. Okay, and you can see it's already dried pretty well, so I can go and add my next layer, which is, I guess, technically layer 3, since I've already gone back over it a couple of times. You should still see where your tape is. That should still show up pretty clearly, because the underglaze won't stick to the tape real well. So you can see those stripes where I had that tape in there. So I make sure I've got a good covering over the whole thing. So if I apply another coat while the coat underneath it is too wet, what's going to end up happening is I'm going to end up starting to take off some of those undercoats if they're still wet, or the color that I applied first will get rehydrated, and then that'll start to show through and show up and stuff. So now that it's pretty much dry, it's kind of velvety. It's not really shiny back here. It's more that dull. I can take my needle tool or an X-Acto knife or something sharp. If you've got long nails work. And I'm just going to go into where I have my tape. I'm just going to peel my tape back, and I'm left with a pretty crisp line. If I wait a little bit longer, it'll probably come up a little bit cleaner. If I wait too long and this gets really dry, when I start to pull up the tape, it'll start to chip some of the underglaze on the edges. So you want to do it when it's kind of that velvety texture or coloring, not when it's shiny, and not when it's completely chalky and dry. I'm just going to peel my tape back, and I'm going to have these nice stripes of color mixed into my black. And I kind of like that uneven edge where the tape was just ripped and not cleanly cut on its edges when I applied it. It's kind of a nice little look. So in this spot where I scraped it off with my fingernail, I can go back and I can just brush a little bit on in those spots to cover that up and fix that up. And when it's fired, you're not really going to notice that too much. It'll even out and you won't see your brush strokes nearly as much as it dries and gets fired. So I've got now, it's almost like confetti look on my cup here. I've got a couple on the handle here that I can pull off too. So that I've got this kind of confetti look to my cup. So now I've got a couple options. I could underglaze the inside and then put a clear in there once it's been fired to make it food safe, or I can pour a I can pour a regular glaze in there and just be careful when I'm dumping it out. But that's how we apply underglaze for decoration. You can also just brush your design on. I use the tape just so I could have that resist and I can have some clean, crisp lines. But underglaze works pretty well because what you see is what you get. This shouldn't be your primary form of glazing, but it should be a tool that you are comfortable using to get desired colors and effects that you want on your design.